Hi all, I have another exciting game to show you from the candidates tournament. So this is in round 12, Mamedyarov against Liren. So let's see what happened in this game. D4 from Mamedyarov, knight f6. We enter into basically a semi-Tarrasch variation with c takes d5, c takes d5. Black plays knight takes d5, e4, knight takes c3, c takes d4, so giving white this pawn duo to try and attack it later. But you also note fundamentally, this is really fundamental about the position, that although d5 might be tempting, black in the long term has a 2-to-1 pawn majority, so sometimes this is going to be significant. So white might have to use some blockading to prevent this outcome of a pawn majority being dangerous. So both sides have their trump cards here. White's got more pawns in the center. So bishop b4 check. The bishops come off here. That's the most common sort of opening sequence here to get rid of white's bishop pair. Bishop c4, knight d7, white castles, b6, rook ad1. So more emphasis is placed on, as though d5 is going to be dangerous, rather than playing rook c1, which some people might routinely play. Bishop b7, hitting the pawn is defended. So the pawn duo seems neatly defended in a classical manner. Rook c8 hitting the bishop just drops back to b3. And now I did some geeky research I'm going to share with you here, because I was curious about rook e8. It's almost like prophylaxis, this move, against say d5. What black could do with a rook on e8 is take on d5 and play rook takes and get a quick blockade of this pawn in the center like this. Basically like this, blockading there, and he's still got the 2-to-1 pawn majority. So there's a little finesse, a blockading finesse with rook e8. If you compare to knight f6, there's either d5 for a try for a small edge, or even knight g5, very tactical in nature, e.g. h6. This is a really tactical line. Bang, knight takes e6, bishop takes e6 check, bishop takes c8, and apparently white's ending up with a big edge there. But safest is not h6 but queen e7. But even here, e5, this position, white's got a small edge there. So it's a little bit tricky. Knight g5 or d5 are both a little bit tricky. So yeah, if we have a look at this, yeah, knight d5. But it might actually be better to play knight e8. So anyway, it's interesting stuff. I thought I'd just quickly share that with you, the finesse of rook e8. So I think it's more overall prophylaxis against d5. h3 is played. We have now knight f6 here. So d5 is not to be that a big concern with rook on e8, ready to swap off. It seems black's in this mode ready to swap things off to sort of do damage limitation for this pawn duo. So queen f4 now. And we have a sort of invitation for a draw, actually, with knight h5, as if the queen goes back, there's going to be knight f6 again. But actually the queen pops to h2, as though Nimzovich is playing the overprotection immortal, keeping an eye on e5 from afar. It looks weird to put a queen on h2, but it's going to be bouncing back soon with a vengeance. h6 is played. Black might not have that many constructive moves in this position. He's like poised to wait for white here and see what's happening. h6 means now knight e5, there's a sensitive spot here on f7. Knight f6, queen f4, and now you can see the knight's tied down to f7 now, so it's kind of pinned basically. There's a pin in the position. Black plays b5, emphasizing the undertone of the 2-to-1 pawn majority. The pawns of the solar chess. So black's playing with soul here, trying to use his trump card from the opening, this pawn majority. If we go for knight takes f7, sorry, after b5, if we go for knight takes f7, trying to exploit the pin, black is willing, of course, just to give back the piece and should be fine here, even though it seems fragmented. It's a technically equal position, so that's not a big deal. Now maybe rook e3 is potentially piling on some kingside pressure, and black safeguards now f7. It seems as though there's another way of playing this position involving a5, by the way, because if knight takes f7 here, there's a nasty shock for white here in the form of a4. You can see that black's control of the c file means this bishop's not going anywhere. Black's winning that. So that's a even a5 here, just tactically, not even from a structural perspective, just pushing through for a4 is actually winning material potentially. So that's another little fascinating nuance of this position. Kasparov said that the battle of the players when they get their trump cards from the opening is often based on the tiniest of nuances to make the arguments for their respective positions. And here we see that it's the nuances making the arguments for the respective positions. But rook c7 here is played. Now we have knight d3, so this advantage of this pawn here is emphasized. Black can't grab that because of queen takes c7. And so the advantage of this pawn is a hook, not just into e5 but c5, and that seems quite a delicious hook on the surface. And it's now that black tries to put the brakes on white's initiative, again taking the opportunity to try and exchange things off. Rook c3. They say, like, a common formula, if you've got less space, you generally try to exchange things off, trying to emphasize the opponent's weaknesses, try and prove that the opponent's somewhat overstretched. So here, by trading off rooks, that seems to be following that recipe, as though white's the one with a slight space edge, at least in the center. But now, there wasn't any time really to play knight takes b7, by the way, because rook takes e4 is very, very good for black. This is very, very good for black. This position, nice blockade position. Still the 2-to-1 pawn majority. Basically, fundamentally, white's pawns are less mobile than black's. And okay, so that'll be very nice. So in fact, we just get the recapture. Queen takes e3, bishop c6, rook c1, queen b6, and here we have. Well, the thing is, knight takes e6 was threatened, by the way. So I just want to show you that if a5 casually, knight takes e6, bang, the c6 bishop is attacked here. So the bishop's safeguarded. f3, rook d8, some pressure on white's center, which is slightly unpleasant. It's kind of pinning down the knight from retreating, it seems. In some case, will do in some cases. We have king f2, and now a5, so the pawns of the solar chess dictating black's play here. He's playing on his trump cards here. White needs basically an undertone of a blockade strategy against the 2-to-1 pawn majority, and in fact this is reflected in that there's a very, very critical move which could have put the brakes on this pawn majority, and it's coming up soon, very soon. G4, a4, bishop c2. Now knight d7, again this policy of trading things off as a form of prophylaxis and trying to expose the potentially overstretched position of white. But here is the key moment when the brakes could have been put on this 2-to-1 pawn majority if white plays knight d3. Knight d3, you can see that there's some pressure on the b4 square. Example, b4, if b4 here, this is overdoing it because of d5. The king's protecting the queen, very important here to be able to play d5, and white would end up with a small edge in this position. Example, e takes, queen takes, knight takes b4. So yeah, it's very important to put the brakes on. In fact, the brakes are not entirely put on here. We see instead bishop d3, and look at the 2-to-1 pawn majority now. We have now knight takes, rook takes, and there's no brakes put on the 2-to-1 pawn majority. b4 is possible. This shouldn't really be possible. This is getting very, very dangerous, this position with this pawn majority against that single pawn there on a2. Bishop c4 is played as though d5 is going to be concerned maybe for black's king. It's a bit ambitious. Black plays another, what seems to be a kind of prophylaxis type move, bishop d7. So now we have actually g5. White is not convinced with d5 here, because actually b3 is very, very dangerous after a takes a3, which is similar to the game, breaking through with a very, very fierce outside pass pawn. So for example, this position is very, very good with rook c8. The king is actually an issue. Check, and then taking here. This is actually very, very good for black. So with that potentially winning pass pawn, and there's king safety issues here as well to factor in. So like there's, you know, things like Queen B8, etc. So this is, yeah, it's getting really, really dangerous. This potential idea of breaking through on the queen side. So G5 trying to maybe get to the black king. HG, queen takes, hitting the rook. But the rook's the rook's actually protected anyway. But there's exposure on the rook. We see actually now bishop E8, which strengthens the F7 potential soft spot point, and also of course unveils an attack on D4 here. Now white puts the pressure on, it seems, with Queen E7, tying down the rook because of the bishop would be hanging. But the queen's protecting the rook's protecting the bishop. Black is not interested in D4 here. He wants his pawn majority, B3, or rather killer pass pawn, to be created. And here we have birth of the killer pass pawn after takes A3. White tries to put a block on the killer pass pawn with B4, but alas now, rook A8, getting away from the foreign line of the queen, threatening now, well, not necessarily A2, because the rook's kind of got the responsibility of the bishop, but things like queen takes B4 now, because the queen, the rook no longer needs to be supported by the queen. We have now white playing, this is a critical, I mean it's already, the damage has been done basically, because the queen is now free for this queen takes B4, which is very dangerous to help maybe pull the pawn down. We have D5. If we try for example B5, A2, and this position with the check means that check here, this is going to be much better for black. That's winning that position is already ready with King F8 if the pin. So D5 was tried, and then we have A2 here, and this is just winning. This is just winning. Yeah, the trump card from the opening is giving black a winning position technically. D takes E6, queening, E takes F7, bishop takes F7. Looks dangerous, but black is ready for some clear defensive punches here. Doesn't matter if queen takes, it's the same thing. Black's going to defend like in the game by using the H6 square here. Check. Queen H6 has got an extra queen. Rook H5. And now Queen A7 check. Ding dong. Fantastically fighting game. That's an English expression apparently. I did look that up before the video. Ding dong. Yes, English dictionary. A very fighting struggle. So Queen A7 check. White resigns. Yeah, here's a queen up, and he's picking up the bishop. King moves, we can just take the bishop here. This just shows chess at a high level. I mean, Kasparov emphasized this between really, really strong opponents. GMs, the difference between GMs and the rest of us playing, you know, either side, we'd lose on either side because they'd use the fine resolution of details, finesses to prove their case of, you know, their trump cards out of the opening being stronger than the opponents. A nice imbalanced battle out of the opening here, with black having the queenside pawn majority fighting against white's central pawn majority, and just shows the little finesses make the huge differences in making the arguments here. White perhaps needed a little bit more blockade. At key moment there was knight d3 to try and keep the equality going of the position, but yeah, it's all about the finesses sometimes in these very, very high level battles. Hope you got something from this. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated, and congratulations to Liren on his first victory in this tournament. Okay, thanks very much.